Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, September the 1st, 2025. Happy September! And today Saturn moves into Pisces, or to be more precise, it moves back into Pisces because over the last couple of years Saturn has indeed been going through Pisces. Then a couple of months ago it changed sign, moved into Aries, then it went retrograde, and now it's returning to Pisces. So in this video I want to look at what it means for Saturn to return into Pisces. I also want to consider the fact that Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus, so that might be of some concern. Saturn moving back into Pisces, Saturn exactly conjunct the Aries point, and Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus. What's that all about? But anyway, I'll look at that later in the video. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching of today, which is Monday, September the 1st, 2025. So here is the chart for today. In fact, it's not the chart for today, it's a chart of the exact Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus. But I'll be looking at that chart later in the video. Here is the chart for today, noon, September the 1st, 2025, New York time. And don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. And so you can see that the moon is in late Sagittarius, and it makes a trine to Mercury. Mercury is also in pretty late Mercury is in late Leo, so makes that trine, and then it moves on to make a square to Saturn, because before the moon moves into Capricorn, because Saturn does move into Capricorn late tonight, early tomorrow, depending on your time zone. The moon, before Saturn moves into Pisces, the moon will have changed sign and moved into Capricorn. But for most of us, it's going to be a pretty moon in Sagittarius day, and you could say that from a lunar perspective, the moon that moon trine Uranus is probably the most important aspect. In fact, there's a grand trine in fire signs if you want to include Chiron. So there's a moon in Sagittarius making a trine to Chiron, making a trine to Mercury, and so with this grand trine in fire signs, I think that many of us are going to want to be individuals. We're going to want to show what we can do, show that we are different, that we can be inspired, and perhaps that we're able to think outside the box. I use that phrase, thinking outside the box, possibly with reference to Chiron, because Chiron is the maverick. Chiron perhaps likes to do things differently. And it's not just about the wounded healer. It's just something quite sort of unique about Chiron. And so with this grand trine and fire signs, we perhaps might want to say things which get everyone's attention, and perhaps we have some thoughts, and we've got powerful thoughts. Mercury has made the trine to Chiron, but it's still picking up on that Chiron energy, and our thoughts are special. And if we have a different way of thinking, and if we want to challenge accepted norms, then perhaps we should take the risk. And then the moon moves on, and it makes a square to Saturn in Pisces, and so that kind of gives us a different view. So you've got the grand trine in fire signs, the excitement of the grand trine in fire signs, and then moon square Saturn. Perhaps we have to face reality. We have to sort of accept the situation and realize that the time has come to perhaps be more serious. And yes, Saturn does move into Pisces, and I'm not saying that we're automatically going to feel Saturn moving into Pisces today. I mean, it's quite a subtle change. As far as when Saturn moves into Pisces, sort of 9:07 London time in the morning. So that's sort of very, very early in the day, middle of the night if you're in the Americas, and sort of later in the day if you're in Australia or New Zealand. So, over the course of the day, Saturn does make this change. And I'll be talking about Saturn in Pisces in greater detail. But, one thing about Saturn in Pisces, it is on the Aries point, 0 degrees Aries. That in itself is important, regardless of what sign it is. The Aries point is about the world at large, and Saturn is about limitation. It's perhaps the realization that there are limits to what we can do. Perhaps there are limits to what nations can do. And, when we look at the world, we may feel a certain sense of negativity there. I mean, Saturn on the Aries point, but we shouldn't take it personally. Things aren't perhaps quite as positive as they used to be, and our perceptions about the future may be tinged by a certain negativity. And again, it's not personal. It's just the fact that Saturn is on the Aries point. And while this is happening, Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus. Again, that's an aspect I'll be looking at in detail later in the video. But, Mars is 135 degrees from Uranus. I keep on emphasizing these semi-square sesquiquadrate aspects really are important. They're probably more important than trines and sextiles. I mean, I know I'm repeating myself again and again and again, but that's, if you get anything from a video, that's one thing you might want to get from it. Don't ignore the semi-squares and sesquiquadrates. Get used to spotting them. And so with Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus, Mars and Uranus as a pair are quite violent. Mars is about anger, aggression, and you throw Uranus in, and it could be unexpected aggression, violence, explosions, and just tension. That's how we can feel. You don't have to have violence with Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus for it to be manifesting. It can just be tense. We just feel that something's happening, that something is about to happen. We're not quite sure what it is, but it makes us nervous. So that could be how Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus works. Now, as far as the lunar sign change is concerned, the moon does move into Capricorn at, 2:45 in the morning tomorrow, Tuesday. So if you're not in the Americas, it really is a moon in Sagittarius day. If you are in the Americas, then that does mean that at sort of 9:45 this evening, New York time, the moon will move into Capricorn, and that would be 6:45 this evening if you're in California or British Columbia or Washington State or Oregon. So if you are in the Americas, then late in the day there is a lunar sign change. You might feel that. I mean, it is a change, moon moving from Sagittarius into Capricorn. Things do slow down, all things being equal, then when the moon moves into Capricorn. Moon moves into an earth sign. So that might be something you pick up on, though it does happen quite late in the day. So maybe even if you are in the Americas, you're not going to feel that sign change until tomorrow. So that is the picture for New York. And as far as Sydney, Australia is concerned, if we set the chart for noon on September the 1st in Sydney as a representative of Australia and New Zealand and East Asia, then the moon is just earlier in the sign. Moon is at 17 Sagittarius, and that means that you're not going to feel the moon square Saturn, for example. Even the moon trine Mercury is is a way off. So the 17, the moon is going to be 10 degrees from a trine to Uranus. So the moon is making a sextile to Mars. I mean, that's the main aspect. If you are in Australasia, the Moon Mars sextile, it's quite a useful aspect. It's happening in the middle of the day, and it perhaps allows you to sort of get things going and to take successful action, particularly sort of maybe late morning. So if you are in Australasia, have an early start, have a dynamic morning. That might be but the best way of using the day's energies. So perhaps an easier and more successful day if you're in Australasia compared with New York, but it's not a huge difference. It's just a matter of degree. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system, and that is not quite what I was looking for. Let me just change the settings to make it heliocentric. There we go. Okay, so there is the heliocentric picture for today, and you can see that there is this grand trine still. I mean, I've been going on and on about this grand trine, but it is important. You can see that the Earth is trine Jupiter, Earth is trine Mars, Mars is making a trine to Jupiter, and I repeat what I say with this grand trine. It's not necessarily fortunate. It's high energy, that's for sure. But we have to remember that geocentrically, we've now got Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus. Geocentrically, we've got Mars trine Jupiter. So where is all that energy going? And it might potentially get out of hand. So we must be careful not to take things too far. And that's the main thing I have to say about the grand trine. The grand trine, on a personal level, it might be that we can get a lot done. When I was talking about the chart for Australasia, I mentioned that there was, the moon was making a sextile to Mars, and so if you've got moon sextile Mars and you've got Mars trine Jupiter, so maybe if you're very focused and you're disciplined, you can accomplish a great deal. But it's so easy not to be disciplined, and when people exaggerate, when people take things too far, when they get too angry, well, things can happen. So I'm wary of that grand trine between the Earth, Mars, and Jupiter in the heliocentric chart. So now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, September the 1st, 2025. Aries. Saturn is moving out of your sign. So Aries, since I think the end of May, you've had Saturn moving through Aries. Let me just make absolutely sure that I've got that right. End of May, sort of around May the 25th. Saturn moved into Aries. So you've been getting used to Saturn being in your sign, and this perhaps gave you sort of pause for thought, and there may have been times where you could see how your freedom of action was being restricted, and that perhaps you felt with Saturn moving into Aries that you had to get yourself together, that something had changed, that you couldn't just do what you wanted anymore, and you had to perhaps be more disciplined, and this wasn't really always to your liking. But now Saturn has moved out of Aries and into Pisces. What does this mean? Well, this might mean that short term you have more freedom. It might feel that a weight has been temporarily lifted from your shoulders. But is that a good thing? And how do you relate to it? Now, you might think, Aries, that something is over, that there was a responsibility you had to deal with, and it's gone or it's going, and that you can relax. And perhaps you can relax, but you just mustn't forget that next year, middle of February, Saturn returns to Aries. And when it returns to Aries, it will stay in your sign for a couple of years. It won't just go away. And so Aries, you do have to perhaps use this opportunity. Perhaps now you've got more freedom. You can perhaps go over old territory, do things perhaps you wanted to do, and so that it may feel good, but don't be complacent. I think that is the important thing about Saturn moving out of your sign. And as far as the particular day-to-day stuff going on today, well, Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus. Mars is your ruler, and if it's making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus, then it's quite an angry aspect. There are things that could make you annoyed, and you have to ask yourself, how is that annoyance working out? Where is it coming from? And it may say something about your attitude to other people. Some people could be annoying. You don't really want to do things other people's way, and there just could be a general feeling of tension in the air. I mean, there's going to be a feeling of tension for all of us. It's not just you, but it could be particularly strong with your ruling planet, sesquiquadrate Uranus. And the question is, how do you deal with it? And how do you stop yourself getting angry? I mean, it's sometimes good to get angry. If something bad is going on, you've got to respond, but you don't want to respond in an exaggerated way, but at the same time you don't want to repress anything. So if you do feel angry about something, be clear about it, because Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus at its worst could be associated with an accident. And so if you're annoyed and you're fuming, then your anger could be transferred into something else. So it's probably not a good idea, Aries, to be doing anything that is, especially dangerous. So, so far I've been somewhat negative, but there is a grand trine in fire signs today, involving the moon and Mercury and Chiron, because you've got Chiron in your sign, and the moon and Mercury are trining Chiron. So Chiron is the maverick. It's about you wanting to do things differently. You're not someone to follow the crowd, and you have to sort of decide, what makes you different, what makes you special, and where you need to stand out. It's not about being different just for the sake of it. It's about being different because there really is something you have to contribute. And with the moon and Mercury making a trine to Chiron, I think it might be about you pointing something out. Perhaps you notice something and you have to say it. And of course this might link with what I was saying earlier about any feelings of anger you might have. And so perhaps if you feel annoyed about something, you need to talk about it. And the sooner you talk about it, the better, because if you keep it to yourself, then it may become a problem. But there's another way of looking at this grand trine, and it might just be about you being able to see things in perspective. It's very easy to get sort of tied up with the minutiae of the world and everything that's wrong with the world, and sometimes getting a broader vision is important, and perhaps seeing that whatever is holding you back is a figment of your imagination, and it's not real, and there is a way to find freedom, and perhaps the grand trine is pointing the way forward. So it's important to be able to sort of handle your feelings, not to get too annoyed, and to also see that you need to get a broader vision. And I think that grand trine in fire signs can give you that vision, and that vision might extend to the spiritual. I mean, don't forget that the moon in late Sagittarius is close to the galactic center, and galactic center, whereas the galactic center 26, 27 Sagittarius, and so the galactic center could give you a broader view, maybe even a galactic view. And so if you can start to see yourself as part of a functioning universe, and you have your own particular role, that might make things easier, and it might also be quite liberating. Taurus. The moon is in late Sagittarius, where it makes trines to Mercury and Chiron. And this grand trine in fire signs is, I think, potentially quite helpful, provided you use it, in the right way. I don't think, Taurus, it's a time for you to be a super extrovert, feeling that you have to be here, there, and everywhere, meeting lots of different people. That's not you at the moment. And I think at the moment, Taurus, you do need to have an appreciation of your own space, and you don't have to draw attention to yourself. But there's still stuff going on with this grand trine in fire signs, and this grand trine in fire signs allows you to tune into something perhaps that is quite deep, quite intense, and you start to have an understanding of what makes you different, why your perspective is different. But you don't have to shout about it, and you don't have to involve other people. In fact, there may be very good reasons not to involve other people. Remember that Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus, and this sesquiquadrate between Mars and Uranus, it can be quite angry. I don't think it's your anger. I think it could be other people's irritation, and other people could jump to conclusions. And if you tell people what's on your mind and what you're planning, their reaction may not be entirely predictable. And so, don't feel you have to necessarily involve other people in your plans and ideas. And instead, if you are mixing with other people, perhaps it should be a sort of a more of a one-way process. You responding to them, you keeping your own thoughts to yourself. You let other people be open about what they're thinking, and you can be positive. You can listen to what they're saying. You can be enthusiastic, and with that approach, I think that you'll make the right impression. And without getting too intense and serious, Taurus, I think that giving an impression of being light and free and happy and not worrying too much about anything is probably the right way to go, even if that impression is wrong. Probably is wrong. I mean, I think there is stuff going on deep down, Taurus, as I've already suggested. But it's not necessarily a time when you need to really share it. Well, unless you're dealing with people who you really understand very well. I mean, you can't take risks at the moment with other people. If you don't know someone, you don't know how they're going to respond. Maybe you know someone so well that you know exactly how they're going to respond, in which case it may be the case that you can be more open and free about your opinions. Now, another thing going on today is that we have Saturn moving into Pisces. And Saturn moving into Pisces it's going to affect all of us. It's going to affect you. So what does it mean for you for Saturn to be in Pisces? Now Saturn is going to be in Pisces between sort of now and February the 13th, February the 14th, and so it might be a time, Taurus, when you need to give some consideration to other people and perhaps to friends, perhaps friends you've recently parted company with. And so, think about what has been going on in your social life, perhaps since the end of May. I mean, some Taurians have perhaps felt that it was necessary to to maintain a distance and to withdraw, to perhaps accept that nothing lasts forever, at least on the social plane. But Saturn moving back into Pisces does give you an opportunity to reconnect. So maybe you're on the point of being so far removed from another person, but it's going to be impossible to restore any line of contact, any connection. But it's only a point, and it may now be a chance for you to get back in touch, and perhaps to work over some sort of old ground, and perhaps there's some unfinished business of a social nature. But don't forget, I'm not just talking about today. I'm talking about the next few months between now and February the 14th, and of course February the 14th. That is when Saturn moves into Aries. It stays in Aries, and that's it. And so, in some respects, if you look back at what's been going on since the end of May, that is the shape of things to come. But you have a chance to go back, to press the back button, and I think that is one way in which you can use this time to get in touch with people who you might be slowly distancing yourself from, because you need all the people you can get, and you never know what people have got to offer. And so you've at the very least got to give them a chance. And on a more sort of short-term level, as I've already said, at the moment, if you want to be, you can be very enthusiastic and positive, and people are going to like that. Gemini. Saturn is moving back into Pisces, and Saturn will stay in Pisces until the middle of February. And this could be another chance for you, Gemini. So do you feel, Gemini, that you've missed an opportunity? That there was perhaps something that you were trying to get together over the last couple of years? You tried your hardest, and, with Saturn moving into Aries, you sort of felt that something stopped working, or you missed your chance, and maybe things started to go wrong, or you started to think about other things. That is always a problem with Gemini. Geminis, they can be very focused, but they can lose that focus, and they might not get it back. And sometimes the universe doesn't give you a second chance, but it is giving you a second chance with Saturn moving back into Pisces. And I know time goes quickly, but February is it's between now and February, you can really refocus, and you can take something which you thought wasn't working. You might even think that it had failed or is in the process of failing, and you can take that and you can put it back on the tracks. You really can with Saturn moving back into Pisces, and so I really do regard this as being completely positive. You are being given another chance, and so that is one way of looking at Saturn moving back into Pisces. I mean, you could say that Saturn moving into Pisces has a more psychological dimension in terms of your past, where you are developing, the sign Pisces from a Gemini perspective, for example, is connected with your mother. It doesn't matter if your mother has been dead for decades; she's still around, and her influence is still around. And perhaps with Saturn moving into Pisces, you're thinking about you will be thinking over the next few months about your mother and her influence on you, and what she was, trying to do. And because the mother is usually one's first connection with the outside world. The mother is always there. The father may not be there. That's why, it makes sense in Western astrology for the father to rule the 4th house and the mother to rule the 10th house. At first, that sounds counterintuitive because, using a sort of a traditional view, you might regard the father as being about career, work, a mother stay at home. Of course, that's quite a traditional way of looking at things. And the astrological view, making the mother the 10th house, is more realistic. And perhaps it's more in keeping with modern times. And the father doesn't have to be there. I mean, he doesn't have to be alive when you're born, but the mother very much does have to be alive. And so maybe this represents some of the feelings you have as Saturn moves back into Pisces. And additionally, Gemini, it's not just about the minutiae of your ambitions, Saturn moving into Pisces. It's also about your whole direction and where you want to go. And perhaps over the last couple of months, you felt that you weren't going in the right direction. And so I really must emphasize, Gemini, that it is an opportunity. You should be very thankful that Saturn is moving into Pisces. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. There are going to be real challenges with Saturn in Pisces, but these are challenges you very much need. So that doesn't really say much about today, because Saturn moving back into Pisces, it is, it's a longer term thing. It's not just a one-day wonder, and it is about this whole period of time between now and February. As far as today is concerned, well, the main aspect is the moon in Sagittarius making a trine to Mercury. In fact, there's a grand trine in fire signs. So moon trine Mercury, it looks a pretty good aspect to me, particularly if you throw Chiron in as well. It's about you being able to talk, to communicate, and you can communicate with a certain amount of grandeur if you so wish. I mean, after all, Mercury is on Regulus, and Mercury, your ruler, is on Regulus. It's on a royal star. It will be on Regulus, for the next couple of days, and so the things you say, will get attention. And if you want to be different, and many Geminis do like to be different, and perhaps rock the boat a bit, that's something that you very much can do. Cancer. The moon is still in Sagittarius, and with the moon in Sagittarius making a square to Saturn, I mean, that's one thing the moon is doing. There could be a feeling of responsibility. Maybe other people don't share this feeling, but you have it, and you do understand that there are certain things that do have to be done, in your own way. And the moon is, it's making a trine to Mercury. It's also making a trine to Chiron. So with the moon, your ruler, making a trine to Mercury, trine to Chiron, you can be very much an individual, but you can be an individual in quite a disciplined and focused way. You have a particular approach, a particular way in which you want to organize things, and you're not going to compromise. Your way of organization is the right way. I mean, that's quite a subjective thing to say, but there's no such thing as a truth, an absolute truth. We all have our own truths. And you have your truth, and you know how things should work, and you know how things should be put together. and it's probably not a good idea to compromise. I mean, you can listen by all means, but I don't think you want to give in to anything. There might be pressure. I mean, Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus, and Mars in a cardinal sign in a Libra. There might be things going on which might be vaguely threatening. They might seem to challenge your view of the world and your particular way you want to put things together. You might be questions. Do you really want to do it like this? But you do want to do it like this, and so do trust yourself to get it right. Now, there is something larger scale happening, and that is Saturn moving out of Aries and into Pisces. And this is important for you. I mean, okay, it might not be important today, but we have to see it as something longer term. Saturn stays in Pisces until the middle of February. Moves back into Aries, not February the 13th, February the 14th, something like that, and Valentine's Day. And so you think about what was going on between, say, end of May and now, because at the end of May, Saturn moved into Aries, and one way of looking at Saturn moving into Aries could be about how you perceived your ambitions. You felt that you had a limited choice, that you had perhaps you'd done your workings out, and there was only one way to go, and you perhaps were resigned to this. You might have done your experimentations over the last couple of years. You've done your thinking, and you worked out what's good, what's bad, and now the die was cast, and the ship had left the port, and that was it. Saturn was in Aries. There was nothing you could do to stop it. The journey had begun, and with Saturn moving out of Aries and back into Pisces, you get another chance. The ship perhaps has come back to port. The journey that you thought has started has not started. And you now have another few months between now and February to think about things again. Are you sure you want to go in the particular direction that you have set for yourself? Are you sure that things are quite as straightforward as they are? And what if you've got other choices? What if you've got feelings of regret? Well, now with Saturn in Pisces, you've got some time to work it through. You've got an opportunity to fine-tune some of your ambitions, and you're able to explore, ask new questions, do more research. It may be, for example, that you have made a decision, you thought you made a decision, and now you want to reconsider it. And that's good. Right? And it's great that you have that opportunity. Also with Saturn in Pisces, it might be a time when you might want to just reconsider your moral compass. I mean, we all have a moral compass, feeling about what is right, what is wrong. And you thought you understood everything. You thought you knew what was right. And with Saturn in Pisces, Saturn moving back into Pisces, you can reconsider it all. And so the situation is becoming more fluid, and I think that's very good. And so you mustn't feel that everything is fated. You have free will now, and I think that free will, it's going to be particularly strong between now and the middle of February. But February's going to arrive pretty soon. Don't think you've got all the time in the world. You've got, what is it? Is that 6 months? Something like, I don't know, 6 months, isn't it? Something like that between now and February. September, October, November, December, January. well, you've got 5.5 months, just under 6 months to sort it all out and to reconsider. But then February will arrive, Saturn will move into Aries, and then the ship really will be leaving the port. So do reconsider your decisions. So that is one way of looking at Saturn at Saturn moving back into Pisces. Saturn moving back into Pisces might also have an impact on some of the people around you, perhaps the important people. You were making decisions about people. You could see how they were behaving. You thought you understood them. And Saturn moving back into Pisces might force you to change your mind. And indeed, another person might change their mind. Someone important, they appeared to be going in a particular direction. They perhaps were quite assertive about it. And you also had your worries. Just because someone is assertive doesn't necessarily mean they're in a strong position. They might have been over-assertive. But with Saturn moving back into Pisces, if you are trying to change someone's mind and you thought it was an impossible task, then with Saturn moving back into Pisces, you perhaps have another chance. So if someone important to you is doing something you don't approve of, you think is wrong, and you thought there was no way of changing their mind, then Saturn in Pisces gives you another opportunity to work on them and perhaps to show them a different view. So it is an important change, Saturn moving into Pisces, and I think that it is a change for the good, because it really does give you a chance to realign and prepare things. So it's not like you've missed your chance. Very much you have another chance, and I think that's important for you, Cancer. Leo. There is a grand trine in fire signs, you could say, if you use Chiron, because we have got the moon in Sagittarius making a trine to Mercury, making a trine to Chiron, and of course Mercury is in Leo. Mercury is in your sign. Mercury is getting quite close to Regulus. I mean, Regulus is something like 0 degrees 11, 0 degrees 12 Virgo. So Mercury getting close to Regulus, and Mercury is in your sign. So Mercury may say something about what you can communicate, what you can say. And there are definitely things you can say which can get everyone's attention. You can be quite dramatic in your own way, and the moon is making a trine to Mercury does mean that it's just easy to communicate. It should be. You can really say what's on your mind, and you shouldn't worry too much about causing a bit of chaos. After all, Chiron is involved. Chiron is the maverick, and so when you look at what's happening around you, you look at what people are thinking and doing, you might have your questions, and you might be thinking, is it really as simple as that? Well, of course it's not as simple as that. And so it's perhaps a time, Leo, when you can point things out, but not in a way that is just frivolous. You're not causing trouble just for the sake of it. You feel that something is important, and right now, Leo, your willpower is strong. You have a powerful sense of what you can do and what you can present. And if you're not happy about something, Leo, then you can change it. And the power of your will right now is enormous. And so you might appear to be quite easygoing, and okay, you can be something of a maverick, but there is definitely a method here. You have a purpose, you have an underlying reason for it all, and so think about what that reason is. What would you like to achieve? And so by stirring things up, you can push the agenda. and you can allow things to happen, your way, and it can happen your way. There's no reason why you should be ignored. There's no reason why things shouldn't happen your way. And you are a Leo, and your individuality does matter, and do take advantage of Mercury being in Leo. Mercury is about to leave Leo. Mercury is about to move into Virgo, and when Mercury moves into Virgo, things won't be quite so straightforward. But now, Mercury in Leo, Mercury is in mutual reception to the Sun. Mercury is your ruler. It's in mutual reception. Mercury's in Leo, the sign of the Sun. The Sun is in Virgo, the sign of Mercury. So Mercury, mutual reception to the Sun. That's good, and that really does put you, I think, in a pretty strong position. And so, don't hold back. Now, one other thing I do have to mention is Saturn. And Saturn is changing sign. And it's moving out of Aries and back into Pisces. And, perhaps with Saturn moving through Aries, and it's been moving through Aries, since the end of May, it could have been a time, where you wanted your freedom. You wanted to move forward, you wanted to explore, and you wanted to see what was available. You knew it wasn't easy. It's Saturn in Aries, but you knew what was important to you. But you did feel perhaps somewhat uncertain. I mean, you had ideas. You thought things were becoming clear, but you weren't entirely confident. And I think it may be that you privately thought that there were certain key issues that you hadn't really understood. You understood half of it, but not all of it. And with Saturn moving back into Pisces, Saturn's moving back into a water sign. And it's going to stay there until February the 13th, February the 14th. With Saturn doing that, I think it's a time when you almost need to deliberately make things more complicated. Things had been complicated, perhaps before the end of May. When Saturn was in Pisces, earlier in the year, but you were looking for simplicity, and you got it, but it still felt unsatisfactory. And so, with Saturn moving into Pisces, maybe something needs to be opened up again. It's like, you had undone something. You'd been looking at the core components of something. Over the last couple of months, things had all been stitched up and everything was fine. But now you just feel that something deep down isn't resolved, and so over the next 5.5 months, it is a time to have another look at it. And in a practical sense, this might relate to arrangements, legacies, agreements, anything that's got fine print, anything that is involving other people. So if you're locked into any agreement, or perhaps we're dealing with wills, it might be a will that you have made, it might be a will someone else has made, where you may or may not be a beneficiary, do explore it. Don't just assume that everything is fine, that all the legal small print is all in order. It might not be. And I'm not trying to deliberately make you concerned. And it's a very good idea to just have another look. And it's not just a one-day process. It's just a process lasting, 5.5 months maybe, as Saturn moves into Pisces. Really understanding, not just the legal small print, but also understanding other people's psychology. Maybe you've made assumptions about other people's psychology and what people are like and what their motivations are. And so perhaps you need to go into the depths over the next 5.5 months just to make sure that you've got everything sorted out. And you shouldn't be afraid of going into the depths. I mean, I'm not talking about the literal depths, by the way. I'm talking about the sort of metaphorical depths, the depths of human psychology. and also, might be legal debts and administrative debts. Just don't assume that things are going to be simple, and you do have another chance to get involved with those complications. Okay, it's not easy, but I think it's something that is worthwhile and certainly the right thing to do, because when Saturn moves into Pisces, of course it's in the same sign as the North Node, because we've got the North Node in Pisces. So definitely the right thing for you to be doing, Leo, between now and the middle of February. Virgo. Mercury, your ruler, is in mutual reception to the Sun. This is something I perhaps should have emphasized more in previous videos. So Mercury, your ruler, is in Leo, and the Sun rules Leo, and the Sun is in Virgo, which is a sign ruled by Mercury. So there is this connection between the Sun and Mercury. They are in each other's signs, and this is a fortunate event. And furthermore, Mercury is moving towards a conjunction of Regulus, the royal star. And even though Mercury is not in Leo, it's not in your sign yet. It's about to move into your sign. Despite all that, Mercury is in a great position, and so it's important to take advantage of this. This is a time when you're able to think very clearly. It's not just about what you say, it is also about what you think. You don't necessarily have to tell everyone what's on your mind. And at the moment you can have powerful thoughts, and you have a fairly good idea about what you need to do, about where you're going. And if you need to communicate, I think that you can communicate with enormous strength, and people are going to listen to you. And you don't have to do everything by the book. There is a place for individuality, and sometimes that is needed. I think today it's needed. Mercury is making a trine to Chiron, the moon is making a trine to Chiron. We have a grand trine in fire signs, and so don't be afraid. Sometimes Virgos can be over analytical. They can sort of worry about what impression they're going to have, but you shouldn't be worrying about that. This is a time for being yourself. And perhaps the main event of the day, even if you don't feel it immediately, is Saturn moving out of Aries into Pisces. Now, from a Virgo perspective, this could be important, especially from a relationship viewpoint. So, you did have Saturn moving through Pisces for a couple of years, and then at the end of May, Saturn moved out of Pisces into Aries, and so you might have thought that Saturn in Pisces was over. Well, it's not over now, because Saturn returns to Pisces and it stays there until February the 13th or 14th. And Pisces is your opposite sign, and it's a sign that in the Virgo horoscope is often connected with relationships. And so it's possible, Virgo, that there have been recent relationships that have maybe weakened. Maybe you and someone else, you've gone your different ways, or you thought that relationships weren't necessary, or you thought you could do things on your own, or perhaps you thought that things were so intense that you couldn't really share it with another person. But now things are changing for a bit. And so between now and the middle of February, it might be a time where, for example, some Virgos have to take the human dimension more seriously. And you thought you could do something on your own, but maybe you have second thoughts now, and you're thinking, well, maybe it would be good to get some help or to get some advice. And so it might be a time where you can bring people back into your life. You don't have to bring them back into your life forever. There's no real sort of commitment here, but you just shouldn't make the assumption that you can do everything on your own. Especially now when the South Node is in Virgo. With South Node in your sign, there is a temptation, Virgo, to think that it's all about you, that you don't need anyone's help. But the North Node is in Pisces. But North Node is in your opposite sign, and now Saturn is moving into Pisces. In other words, Saturn and the North Node are going to be in the same sign, in Pisces, and that's perhaps where the obligation lies, and to think about what other people can do for you. And if over the last couple of months a particular relationship has faded away, become more distant, perhaps it's broken apart, perhaps you should give it another thought. I'm not saying that you should give people another chance. If someone has let you down badly in the past, you certainly don't want to give them another chance. But there are different ways in which relationships can break down. It may not be about bad treatment. It just may be that people they meet like ships in the night, and then they separate, and then they never see each other again. But maybe there is a place here for giving someone another chance, or at least spending time with someone who maybe they're going to go in the end, but just seeing what else they've got to say, seeing what else they've got to contribute. And it's nothing you have to do today. Today's just Monday. But it's about the next 5.5 months, while Pisces makes its return, while Saturn makes its return to the sign Pisces. Libra. There is some change. There are some changes going on, and one change that's going on is that Saturn is moving out of Aries. So, at the end of May, Saturn moved into Aries, and I made a big deal of it at the time. Aries is your opposite sign. Aries is a sign, connected with relationships in the Libra chart, and so it could have been the case, over the next couple of months, that over the last couple of months, that other people were important. They made their presence felt. They could also have been quite irritating, and you may have been of a view that certain people were just difficult to get rid of, and perhaps it wasn't always very easy, certainly as far as relationships were concerned, and maybe you felt that things were just going in the wrong direction, and you weren't ready for that change of Saturn moving out of Pisces into Aries. Well, Saturn now leaves Aries, and it leaves Aries. It goes back into Pisces. It stays in Pisces until February the 13th or the 14th of next year. And so this might be a time, Libra, where you have a chance to reconsider various relationships in your life. And this is particularly the case if, over the last couple of months since the end of May, if perhaps you and someone else had got very close to one another and you were then starting to have your doubts. Well, it's okay to have doubts now. And if you feel unsure about another person's role in your life, then now's the time to really articulate your concerns, certainly to yourself. And so, don't feel guilty if you are having second thoughts about someone else. And I'm not necessarily talking about romance. Relationships have different dimensions. It could be a contract. You're making an agreement with someone, and you thought that this agreement might be a commercial agreement, a financial agreement, some other kind of agreement. You might have thought that this agreement was written in stone, and there was no way you could get out of it. Saturn in Aries. But now that Saturn is moving into Pisces, you need to have another look at it, or at least you can have another look at it. And with Saturn in Pisces, it's a time, Libra, where you can really look at the details again. And you can really look at them. And that's what you should do. And it's the details of everything. And so, the best way overall, Libra, for you to spend the next 5.5 months is to just be really attentive to the details of everything, to the organization of everything, to the structure of everything. Making sure that everything really is right before you make any new commitments. And I mean, I think that in February and beyond of next year, there will be commitments to be made, but you now have a chance to reconsider things, and I think that you should be very grateful about that. You are certainly being given another chance. So nothing is written in stone. If you've made an agreement and you feel that you've got some moral obligation to keep that agreement, there's no moral obligation. You need to do what's right for you. I think that is very important. And as far as today is concerned, I mean, I've gone on and on about Saturn. That is a more of a sort of a long-term trend. As far as today is concerned, I think you're in quite a good mood at the moment. You're feeling good about yourself, and you can make other people feel good about you. I think that you're going to have sort of a natural ability to communicate, and I think that you're going to be quite warm and friendly and welcoming. And if anyone is feeling down in the dumps, Libra, then you're going to be very good at cheering them up. You'll know what to say. And if you yourself happen to be feeling down in the dumps, I don't think you will be, but if you happen to be, then try to be positive. A bit of positive thinking today can go a long way. Try to see the best in things. And if you take that approach, then, I think it can be, a pretty good Monday. Scorpio. Mars is doing stuff. Mars is your ruler. And, Mars is certainly making a square to Jupiter. And that Mars square Jupiter is increasing your energy levels, and you're aware of all the things you could be doing, and there might be a question of where do you stop. And I think it's important with this Mars square Jupiter that you channel it in the right way. You don't want to be in a position where your energy is just being completely scattered. I mean, that would not be a good thing. You need to think about what is important for you. And so ideally, Scorpio, you would just focus on one thing and just give it everything you've got, and not get distracted. Now, Scorpio, I think that's usually something you can do. I mean, Scorpio is a sign that tends to be quite focused, and I think that focus can be good for you. But you can get too much focus, particularly if you're annoyed about something. And it's not just that we've got Mars square Jupiter, we've got Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus today, and I do think that Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus is an aspect that should not be discounted. I mean, Uranus, the planet of revolutions, it's also the planet of accidents. And it can be just too hasty. You can be in a hurry to get things done, and in that hurry, you could trip up. I mean, I'm not saying you literally trip up, but do think about what you're doing, and think about where you're putting your feet. And if you're involved in anything that's safety critical, be extra careful with Mars making that aspect, because things could go wrong, especially if you're annoyed about something and that annoyance gets transferred to something else. That's how accidents can often happen. You get annoyed and you're in denial about your annoyance, and then that annoyance reveals itself as some kind of smash. But that's not something we want to happen, and I think that would be unnecessary. So be careful about how you use your energy. It would just be rather too easy today for that energy to get misplaced. And on a more positive note, we do have a grand trine involving Mercury, Moon, and Chiron, a grand trine in fire signs. So if you want to look at Chiron, I think Chiron does have some relevance here. And so, Moon trine Mercury, it's quite practical, actually. I mean, Mercury is in a high-profile sector of your chart. It's still in a high-profile sector of your chart. Leo is, from a Scorpio viewpoint, Leo is a sign that is connected with success and ambition. Mercury is not going to stay in Leo for much longer. Mercury is actually getting ready to leave Leo and move into Virgo. But right now, Mercury is very strong. It's in mutual reception to the Sun in Virgo because Mercury and the Sun are in each other's signs. And also Mercury is conjunct Regulus, the royal star. And so, Scorpio, it's a time where you really can stand out and you can really advocate for your own interests. And so, do not hold back. But be focused. Remember what I was saying about all this energy? Yeah, you have a lot of energy. This energy could get out of control. But if you can just focus your energy on what's important to you and on your ambitions, and not be crazy about it, and just be methodical, then I think that's going to be the right approach. Now, we do have Saturn changing signs. So Saturn has been in Aries since the end of May, and now Saturn is moving back into Pisces. And Scorpio, I think that's good news. It gives you a chance to go over something that you might have missed, and perhaps we're thinking about your creativity. That is one way of looking at it. Perhaps you'd tried to be creative up to a point. You'd perhaps been successful, but now that Saturn had moved into Aries, there were other concerns, and you perhaps were involved in something that was really quite important to you over the last couple of years, and it really mattered, and you got great satisfaction from it. And since the end of May, it may have just sort of faded into the background. You just felt that there were other things that were more important that you needed to look at, and it got forgotten. And now, with Saturn moving back into Pisces, you should be thinking back over the last couple of years. What was really important to you over the last couple of years? Were you engaged in something that you felt really good about? And now with Saturn in Pisces, you can reconnect. And this time round, when you reconnect, you should be reconnecting with an eye to the future. You perhaps need to, it's like you've got something that's very important to you. You lost touch with it temporarily. You could see it sinking out of your grasp. You're about to lose it. And then suddenly with Saturn moving back into Pisces, you can grab it again. And this time round, you want to hold it and really make it part of your routine. And I think that is the important point. And take it so seriously that it's such an important part of your routine. But when Saturn moves into Aries in February of next year, it's going to stay as part of your routine. So don't think that some creative endeavor has been lost forever, because it hasn't. And with Saturn moving back into Pisces, you have a chance to get in touch with it. So that may be one way of looking at it. I mean, there are other ways we could see Saturn in Pisces. I mean, it kind of depends on your situation and your circumstances. I mean, we shouldn't forget that from a Scorpio point of view, the sign Pisces can be connected with children, and so if you have children, however old those children might be. With Saturn moving back into Pisces, there may be something to do with your children that you need to work through. or the issue of children may need to be worked through, whatever that might be. And perhaps you thought things were moving on when Saturn moved into Aries, but now you perhaps need to go back and have another look at it. It depends on your situation, but I thought I just had to mention that. Sagittarius. There are things going on. There are things changing. And one change we have is, of course, Saturn moving back into Pisces. So, I've been going through the 12 signs and considering what it might mean for Saturn moving back into Pisces. It's not the only thing I'm going to talk about here. But when we think about Saturn moving back into Pisces, it's about perhaps going back to something which you thought you'd moved on from. That may be one way of looking at it. And I think the advantage of Saturn going retrograde, for all of us, regardless of our sign, gives us another chance to go over something which we thought we'd sorted it out, but privately we knew we hadn't. And so for you, with Saturn moving into Pisces or back into Pisces, it may say something about your home, and it may say something about your family. And with Saturn moving into Aries, you perhaps felt that issues around your home weren't maybe quite so important, and you perhaps wanted to move on and wanted to perhaps do something more exciting and more adventurous. But now you're being pulled back. And that pull back is especially important for you because we've got the North Node in Pisces as well. So you've got the Saturn and the North Node in Pisces. So that suggests to me, Sagittarius, that what's going on in your home and your family is important, and it does require your attention. And it may be that there's just something you need to sort out and resolve. And you thought you'd resolved it, but privately you knew you hadn't, and now you need to think about it again. Now, it could be something tedious like some repair on. If you own your own home, there may be some repair that you didn't want to do. You thought it could be avoided, and you perhaps thought over the last couple of months you'd moved on. But with Saturn moving back into Pisces, you now have another look at it, and you say, well, this does have to be sorted out. And you don't have to do anything right now, but you have to remember that Saturn stays in Pisces until the middle of February of next year. So over the next 5.5 months, that might be something you want to think about, or it could be something to do with your family. Some aspect of family relations which you had discounted or you thought was unimportant, and maybe you'd lost touch of a member of your family, you'd fallen out with them, and you just regarded it as all a done deal. But now you have a chance to have another look at it, and so that might be, Sagittarius, a good thing for you to do, and certainly I think the right thing to do, because as I've said, the Saturn it's not just Saturn that's in Pisces, it's a North Node there as well, and North Node represents the right direction. It is the direction you should be heading in. And aside from that, looking at today, there is a grand trine in fire signs, and the moon is still in Sagittarius. Okay, the moon does leave Sagittarius. Well, if you're in the UK, Europe, that would be sort of 2 or 3 in the morning, 2:45, 3:45 in the morning, sort of later, much later if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But if you're in the Americas, the moon will leave Sagittarius this evening. So, that means, wherever you are, at the very least, you're going to have most of the day with the moon in Sagittarius. And the moon in Sagittarius, it does make a trine to Mercury. It makes a trine to Chiron. So it's got a grand trine in fire signs. And I think that is that's a great configuration. It allows you to be a Sagittarius in all your glory, and you can make things happen, and you have ideas. Really respect your ideas of that moon trine Mercury, and you've got something to contribute, you've got something to offer, and you can make things exciting, and you can be disruptive. Sagittarius can be a disruptive sign. Sometimes Sagittarius can be too disruptive, but today people do need to listen, and they need to understand that you have got something important to offer. You've got something to understand. You've got to understand that you have got something important to offer. So don't hold back. But at the same time, Sagittarius, don't underestimate other people. The moon is making a trine to Mercury. Mercury is in mutual reception to the sun. Mercury could represent someone who is really worth taking seriously. They're available to you. They've got something to offer you, and perhaps you should find out what it is that they've got to offer, because I think there's a chance that you could gain from the experience. So it's not all about you, and you don't have to do things on your own. Capricorn. Saturn is your ruler, and Saturn is changing sign. And that is possibly quite important. And so, Saturn has been in Aries, and it's been in Aries since the end of May. And now it leaves Aries and goes back into Pisces. And inevitably, that might have an impact on you. So, with Saturn moving into Aries, this might have been a time when some Capricorns were trying to really stabilize things. You saw how things were. You saw how things were changing. You understood a lot, and having understood a lot, you decided, well, this is it. We're going to fix things here, and that's it. It's a done deal. And so you might be looking for security, and you thought you had the basis of security because you understood enough. And maybe it was a time also when you felt that you could ignore certain facts. So there was information coming your way, but you didn't need this information. You'd already got it. You'd already understood it. And that was it. But now, with Saturn moving out of Aries into Pisces, back into Pisces, well, you're now beginning to realize, Capricorn, or rather you will start to realize, remember Saturn will be in Pisces until the middle of February. Then it will be in Aries, and it will stay in Aries for a couple of years. But while Saturn is in Pisces over the next 5.5 months, you have a chance to explore things, to reconsider things, and to have another look at the facts. Yeah, you understand a lot of the facts, but you haven't got everything. And there's new information coming out that you need to take on board. And I think that's perhaps what it's all about. Things change, circumstances change, and over the next few months, you'll start to see what has changed, and you'll then realize that you hadn't got it all sorted out, and you perhaps got to reconsider what stability is all about. You're not ready to batten down the hatches to say, well, this is it. This is where I am. I don't need to change. So try to read as much as possible over the next few months. And I'm thinking particularly of, the news, perhaps advances in technology, advances that are relevant to whatever your domain is, whatever it is you're involved with. So for example, if you're a medical doctor, you should be spending really a lot of time reading about reading medical journals and whatever. Or if you're a lawyer, then advanced changes in the legal system, or if you're a scientist, of course, probably doctors, lawyers, and scientists, maybe they don't watch this channel. But whatever it is whatever your expertise is. I mean, I don't know if you're a Reiki healer. I don't know anything about Reiki healing, but I'm sure there are advances in your profession, and there might be legal issues changing. Find out whatever it is. There's more to know. You haven't understood the full picture, and that's something you can do. Between now and the middle of February. Not something you could do. I think it's something that you actually should be doing. And another point to make about Saturn, on a more sort of short-term level, is that Saturn, your ruler, is at 0 degrees Aries. It's on the Aries point. And this is important for you because you are now connected with the world, because that's what the Aries point is. It is the world point. And, it's like, we've got these points in astrology, like the ascendant and the node. And the node, the ascendant is more personal. It's about your connections, perhaps with other people, maybe partners, spouses. Then you've got the nodes, which is your broader contacts, perhaps the people you have to sort of meet in your day-to-day life. And then you've got the Aries point, so it's the next progression. It's your connection with everything, and so your connection with the world does matter, and that is another reason why you need to think about what's happening in the world and understanding that changes in the world are going to affect you, and so you really need to be in touch, with whatever is happening, and that's the right way to handle today and its challenges. And as far as how you behave regarding other people today, I don't think there's much you have to do. I think you don't have to be seen, you don't have to be heard. Although things are changing. Remember, the moon is moving into Capricorn. If you're in the Americas, then this evening the moon moves into your sign. If you're not in the Americas, then it will be tomorrow. And so with the moon moving into Capricorn, then perhaps you can be more of an extrovert. And the moon having moved into Capricorn, it will start making a trine to the sun, and I think that is a really useful aspect. Moon trine sun. But I'll be talking more about that when I do my reading for tomorrow, which is Tuesday. Aquarius. Saturn is your ruler. Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn as well. So I was pointing out when I was doing Capricorn's horoscope that Saturn was changing sign, as a Saturn moving out of Aries into Pisces. I was pointing out to Capricorn that this was an important event. And so with you, Aquarius, you have got Saturn as your ruler, and Saturn is changing sign. And so inevitably, that is likely to have an impact on you. So, the question is, what kind of impact, and how should you see it? Well, I don't want to over dramatize it, and it's not necessarily about anything going on today, Monday, but Saturn will be moving through Pisces for the next 5.5 months. I mean, it'll go back into Aries in sort of mid-February, but as far as the next 5.5 months are concerned, with Saturn moving back into Pisces, there may be things that you need to consider that you haven't taken sufficiently seriously. And one thing I'm thinking about is money. I know money is a really boring subject, but money unfortunately does matter. And perhaps over the last couple of months, you'd sort of rushed ahead, or maybe I won't say rush ahead. You don't rush with Saturn, but as Saturn's moved into Aries, you felt you were moving on, and the sort of financial issues might have sort of moved into the background and weren't quite so important. But now that Saturn is moving back into Pisces over the next 5.5 months, you just might find that money does matter. I mean, you didn't want it to matter, but it can't be helped. And so do think about money and ask yourself, have you really sorted it out? Have you really understood where it's all going, and your outgoings and your incomings? Is it all in order? And it is definitely the right thing to be doing, because it's not just that Saturn is moving back into Pisces. You've got the North Node in Pisces as well, and so this really is a time, Aquarius, where money arguably should be your number one priority. And it doesn't really matter how much money you have or how little money you have, it still matters. It's something that you really should be thinking about. And so don't shy away from financial details. Yeah, it is boring, but I think it's something that you should pay attention to. And it's not necessarily anything negative. I mean, it could be that you have a chance to make more money, and perhaps you had an opportunity to make money in the past, or to make extra money, and you neglected this opportunity, or the opportunity passed you by. But now, with Saturn moving back into Pisces, that opportunity might come back into focus. So from a financial point of view, don't feel that you've missed your chance, because the chance is now very much on the table again. So that's the financial side of things, and that's Saturn moving back into Pisces. And even if we aren't thinking about money, the very fact that Saturn is changing sign from Aries to Pisces, it just might feel that you are becoming sort of more sensitive. Perhaps there was a sensitivity that was around over the last couple of years, but somehow you had become perhaps less sensitive over the last couple of months. But now, with Saturn moving into Pisces, your emotions perhaps are going to start to free up, and that could be useful. And it could be useful in terms of just understanding the world in which you are living. And aside from that, Aquarius, there is a sesquiquadrate between Mars and Uranus. And this Mars-Uranus sesquiquadrate, I've talked about it to some of the other 12 signs, and I've said that it was potentially quite a difficult aspect. But in your case, it might be that you can actually use it in a constructive way. I mean, the Mars-Uranus sesquiquadrate is not comfortable with the way things are. It wants to break down barriers. It's tense. And maybe you're feeling tense about something, and your tension may have a creative nature. And you feel that you're not getting enough opportunities to do the things that you want to do. And Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus, while it can be destructive and it can be dangerous, I mean, you can associate Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus with accidents. But I also think that Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus could be about you having the ability to break something down in a constructive way, something that had been holding you back. Now you can have another look at it, and you can perhaps find a way of finally breaking free from it. And once you break free from it, you are able to sort of move onto new territory, and that could be quite inspiring. Pisces. Saturn is moving back into your sign. So, Saturn was in Pisces for some time. I think Saturn went into Pisces at the beginning of 2023, and then it stayed in Pisces. Was it March 2023, I think, offhand? And then it stayed in Pisces until the end of May 2025. And then it left, and it was in Aries. And you were perhaps getting used to not having Saturn in Pisces. And when I talked about Saturn in Pisces, I was suggesting that maybe this was a time when Pisceans were more focused and were more disciplined than usual, it was almost like you became quite a Saturnine person. I mean, I don't know how you personally experienced it, but obviously I'm making something of a generalization here. But you could have been more Saturnine than usual with Saturn in Pisces, and you were focused, you were disciplined, and the Saturn left Pisces, and so maybe over the last couple of months since the end of May, it may have felt that you were to an extent losing your focus, and you weren't quite sure what was going on, and you were worrying about other things. And now with Saturn moving back into Pisces, I think that you get your focus again, and maybe there's something you need to work through that but you were working through before May, and it seemed to be coming together. Then you lost it, or maybe you just lost it over the summer. I mean, from a northern hemisphere perspective. But anyway, it's coming back now, and I think that Saturn moving back into Pisces, particularly as the North Node is in Pisces, this is, I think, it's a good thing for you, because it allows you to concentrate on what is important and to be disciplined. And maybe you need to have another look at your boundaries. Maybe recently your boundaries have been crossed and you have been weakened by other people's behavior. Perhaps they've taken you for granted. They'd assume that you were more relaxed, that you had you had sort of lost your cutting edge, but now you've got your cutting edge back, very much so, and it is coming back over the next 5.5 months. And so if there is more work to be done, and I think there is more work to be done, there were things you were supposed to have sorted out. You were supposed to have sorted them out by the end of May. You hadn't sorted everything out. And now that Saturn is moving into Pisces, you can get things together, and you can be strong, and you can make sure that by the time Saturn moves into Aries in middle of February of next year, that everything is sorted out, that you absolutely know who you are, you know what your boundaries are, and you're not going to make the mistakes of the past. So this is very much a good thing, Saturn moving into Pisces. I'm not saying it's always going to be easy. I mean, Saturn in Pisces, you think about discipline and forcing yourself to structure yourself. Okay, that's may not always be fun, but it is certainly good for you, and it is the right thing to do. Now, looking at today on a more sort of short-term level, I don't think you're necessarily going to feel Saturn moving into Pisces like today. It's more of a long-term trend. We do have the moon in sort of late Sagittarius, and so the moon is making a trine to Mercury, and it's also making a trine to Chiron. I think that this grand trine in fire signs, if you count Chiron as a planet being able to create a grand trine, I think this grand trine in fire signs is going to be pretty useful, pretty practical, actually. I mean, I know that Monday, I believe, I get confused. I think today, Monday in America, is a holiday, isn't it? Labor Day. Maybe you're not working if you're in the United States, but it doesn't matter. I mean, there are things to do wherever you are. Maybe you're not in the United States. You're probably not in the United States. Not everyone who watches this is in the United States. Less than half of people who watch this are in the United States. But anyway, this grand trine in fire is motivating, and it allows you to sort of get yourself together and to make it clear what is important. And even if you're not working today, there are things that need to be done, things that need to be sorted out, and you can sort them out very quickly, very easily. It'll be very straightforward. And additionally, I think that help will be at hand. I think that you can probably rely on another person to give you assistance. I mean, not saying everyone is going to be reliable, but enough people will be reliable for you to really be able to get yourself together. But even if no one else is around, you can do it on your own. So it's overall looks like being a pretty good day. Not a day when sort of necessarily amazing things are going to happen, but I think that you can get your act together and really ensure that the rest of the week runs pretty smoothly. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 2, which is the receptive. It's pure yin. We've got 6 broken lines. So yeah, pure negativity. And the general advice here with the receptive is to do nothing. It's not about creating anything. It's the opposite of the hexagram number 1, which is the creative. So it's not a day for putting anything out, for necessarily expressing what we think, what we believe. It's instead a time for just observation, just seeing what is the world doing, what's happening around us, how do we respond. And because it is a receptive, we're not giving out, and we are receptive to the vibes, the atmosphere. And if we try to make anything happen, then it's likely to backfire. We'll be out of tune with the universe. And so don't feel that there's anything that you absolutely have to do. And of course, if you're in the United States, that sort of fits very nicely with the fact that today, Monday, is a holiday. It's Labor Day. There's nothing that has to be done, supposedly. Of course, I understand that lots of people are working on Labor Day. Lots of people are doing stuff on Labor Day. But, perhaps try to get into the spirit, if you're in the United States, of a holiday. That's what you should be doing. Don't feel that you're obliged to make anything happen, because you're not. And if you were to try to make things happen, it might backfire. Now we've got one of these lines does move. The second from the bottom moves, and it's just really telling you that, or telling us that we need to just go with the flow. Nothing should be an effort. If you're doing something and it's an effort, then you're probably doing it wrong, or you probably shouldn't be doing it at all. So everything should be natural, organic, and shouldn't require any effort. And if you do that, you're not going to go wrong. I don't think. Perhaps that's in accordance with the fact that we do have a grand trine in fire signs. We've got Moon, Mercury, and Chiron making a grand trine. And so when you think about a grand trine, you think about something natural, effortless. It's not dynamic. And so, you go with the flow, but it's about you going with the flow. It's not about you creating anything. Now, because we have a moving line, that means that we do move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 7, which is the army. Now, that might seem rather contradictory. We've just had the receptive, just going with the flow. Then we have 7, the army. What does that mean? Well, everything has to be natural, and the army is, you could say, about a defense force, or it's about being part of a larger group. And the thing about being in an army is one is part of a hierarchy. There are people above us telling us what to do. Maybe there are people below us and we're telling them what to do. I mean, that may be the way the army works. But the army means that, we shouldn't feel that we are necessarily alone, and that perhaps we can benefit by joining something broader from ourselves, and in the process giving up a lot of freedom, but it's for the best. So that may be one way of looking at the army. Another way of looking at the army is just looking at one's resources. What are all one's resources? And one just has to naturally tune into what we have and be aware of what we have, and perhaps be aware of the strength of what we have. But just because you've got an army doesn't mean that you attack. And this is not a time for attack. It's about just looking at the situation, accepting the situation, and for going with the flow. But the army does give it a bit of an edge, and it's saying that things are not necessarily entirely straightforward out there. There may be threats, but if we join with the right group of people, or perhaps we bring together our own resources, we're going to be fine. And it's certainly not a time for taking offensives or for taking aggressive action. That's absolutely not what today is about. And now I want to look at Saturn in Pisces. And so Saturn does move into Pisces today. And so here is the chart for the precise moment that Saturn enters Pisces. So there is, it's today, September the 1st. I make it at 9:07 a.m. London time. So you can see there is Saturn at 0 degrees, 0 minutes Aries, and that's when it happened. So what does it mean for Saturn to move into Pisces? And it stays in Pisces, I think, for 5.5 months. So we got September, October, November, December, January. 5.5 months in February. So very slightly under 5.5 months, because February is a short month. And so Saturn is moving out of a fire sign into a water sign. It's moving out of a sign where it is fallen. Traditionally, Saturn does not work well in Aries. It is in its fall into Pisces, where it's more neutral for Saturn to be in Pisces. So you could say that Saturn is getting stronger by moving out of Aries and into Pisces, although it is retrograde, but it's not going to be retrograde forever. By the end of the year, I think November, Saturn turns direct, and so as that does. For many of us, it's going to be about going back over, old territory, and I think that so we need to think about what were we doing before the end of May? How did the summer? Winter if you're in the northern hemisphere. How has the summer or the winter if you're in Australasia or South Africa? How has that worked out for you with Saturn moving into Aries? And I think that some of us might have felt that the summer, hasn't always been great. We lost touch with things. We lost the plot, and we're wondering, are we going to be able to get back in touch? And I think now that Saturn is moving back into Pisces, perhaps we can go back to what was going on, say at the end of May, and pick up where we left off. So I think that there is a positive message here for Saturn to moving into Pisces. I think that another aspect of Saturn moving into Pisces, given what we know. And I think that it does relate to what's been going on with sort of wokeness. I know that people get offended when I use the term woke. Do you really know what the word woke actually means? I think that woke was originally a sort of an African American word, but you're using do you really understand the structures of oppression that, for example, slaves were under? And I think that was how originally the word woke was used. But it's come to have a sort of a more general meaning, and it's been connected, with being overly sensitive to various differences in society, gender differences, for example, and diversity and so forth. And I think that Saturn in Pisces has been at a time when the issue of wokeness, I'm using it in a sort of general colloquial way. Don't be too critical if you feel that I've sort of lost, I don't know what it means. I think I have a good idea of what it means. And So, Neptune has been in Pisces, and Neptune has left Pisces. Neptune will, of course, go back into Pisces. So it's like the whole Pisces issue is going to come back into focus, and perhaps issues regarding wokeness and diversity, and which of course, when Trump got elected, there was it suddenly everything changed. American companies were dropping all their ideas about diversity and sacking their diversity officers, and that was Trump. And it was also the fact that Saturn and Neptune, Trump was not, it wasn't Trump himself, but Trump was a symbol of a change, moving from Pisces into Aries. But now things are going back into back into Pisces. And so perhaps some of those culture wars, which were becoming so intense at the time that Trump was elected, are perhaps going to come back into focus. So that might be one aspect of Saturn moving into Pisces. And also Saturn in Pisces, the whole chaos. I mean, Pisces is a chaotic sign, and with Saturn moving into Pisces, it's like we're going back into the sea. We thought we had definite action. I mean, you think about Trump. Trump really tried to be Saturn and Neptune in Aries. People wanted leadership with Trump. I mean, that's what people were looking for. I think they want leadership in general. Everyone wants leadership. They want strong leadership, and you need to be a strong leader. And where are the strong leaders? And so with Saturn in Pisces, Saturn moving back into Pisces, I think things are going to become like even more nebulous. And so I think that it just may be a time where just things get very confused again. I mean, things already are confused. I think they're going to get even more confused. Where are the leaders? The leaders aren't anywhere. And so that could say something about the next 5.5 months. But we shouldn't perhaps see it as just about Saturn moving out of Pisces. We should maybe also be thinking about Neptune as well. Neptune will leave Pisces. Sorry, we shouldn't just think about Saturn leaving Aries and entering Pisces. We should also think about Neptune. I mean, Neptune leaves Pisces around the 22nd, 23rd of October. So by the end of next month, those two planets, Saturn and Neptune, will both be in Pisces. So we get a blast of chaos again. And we're out there in the sea, in these two planets in water signs. So those are a few thoughts about what it means for Saturn and Neptune, particularly Saturn, to be in Pisces. But we shouldn't forget also that Saturn is on the Aries point, and perhaps that's the key thing. Saturn at 0 degrees Aries. And so when Saturn is at 0 degrees Aries, we are thinking about the world point Aries, and it's Saturn, and we can see that things are not good. We're aware of all the hold-ups, all of everything that's wrong with the world, and the feeling that the world it's not great, and that there are major barriers to deal with, and it could just also be just a general feeling of pessimism at the moment. While Saturn is at 0 degrees Aries, right now, Monday, over the next few weeks, while Saturn is, for example, within 1 degree of the Aries point. But we've got this already, and so that might be one way of looking at it. And as far as what else we should be looking at now, one thing that is happening at the moment. Now, this is a chart for Saturn, for the exact moment that Saturn is moving into Pisces. But at the same time as this is happening, we have got Mars making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus. So Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus, that is a difficult aspect. We are living in explosive times. Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus can represent events which might not necessarily be very fortunate. I mean, I don't know what kind of weekend we had. I mean, the weekend, or I mean, the big event the weekend was, there was a right-wing, ultra-nationalist right-wing politician was assassinated in Lviv in Ukraine. I think I might talk about that in my next video. So we had that. I don't know quite how big a deal that was, but it does illustrate that we are in difficult times, and perhaps we should be thinking about some of the people who might be impacted by all of this. I'm thinking we need to pay close attention now to Emmanuel Macron. By the way, I mean, I'm going to be looking at Emmanuel Macron further. But don't forget, Emmanuel Macron has his Mercury at. Emmanuel Macron has a Sun Mercury conjunction at 29. Well, 20. He's got his Sun at 29.25 Sagittarius. He's got his Mercury at 29.52 Sagittarius, and so he has got Saturn square his sun, his transiting Saturn square his Sun Mercury conjunction. So as this is what's going to happen as Saturn moves back into Pisces. And we shouldn't forget that I think next Monday, I think it's on September the 8th, there is a confidence motion in the French Parliament. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think this is, if it fails, that could have big implications for the French economy. From what I'm saying, from what I've heard, it is likely to fail. So Macron is going to be under continued pressure, and it doesn't even end. I mean, with Macron, just as a reminder, Macron there's an eclipse going on on September the 21st, which is right on. Which the eclipse is it's where is it? The eclipse on the 21st of 21st of September is it's a new moon at 29 Virgo, so that will be square his Sun Mercury conjunction. So Macron is certainly under a lot of pressure, and that eclipse on the 21st, when is it? 21st is opposition Saturn. So France is a country that we should really be looking at. So that's September the 21st. But it's I will be talking more about Macron, and don't forget also the UK. If we take the 1066 chart, it is set for 1066, even though it says December the 21st. That is Julian converted to Gregorian, but it is December the 25th, 1066, Christmas Day, 1066, when William I was crowned, and the moon was right at the end of Pisces. So Britain's moon represents the people, and that's one way of looking at it. And it's the moon, an important planet. It says something about the country, and so we've got Saturn moving onto Britain's moon, England's moon, or it's a chart that's important to the United Kingdom. So Saturn moving onto the moon is certainly not good news. And we do have a new moon eclipse coming up. So that doesn't look easy. And then of course we've got the Mars-Uranus sesquiquadrate, and just to finish with that. It does impact Ukraine and NATO. You remember Ukraine has its sun at 0 degrees 56 at 0 degrees 56 Virgo, and Ukraine has its Ukraine has its sun at 0 degrees 56 Virgo. NATO was ratified when the sun was at 1 degree 7 Virgo, and so I've already mentioned the fact that Uranus is making a square to both NATO and Ukraine's suns because they were born on the same day. NATO was ratified on August the 24th, 1949, and Ukraine became independent on August the 24th, 1991. So we got Uranus square their sun, and then Mars is coming along to trigger it all. So there may be events happening now, Monday, which could have an impact on NATO and Ukraine. Maybe who knows what's going on in Ukraine, and Russia, just things going to happen which could just stir things up even more. So that's it. Those are a few thoughts about Saturn in Pisces and Saturn moving into Pisces. And yes, we do have Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus, which I think is a very important aspect. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.